When we're designing our OKRs or goals or strategies for the year, there's an often overlooked and critical piece of thinking that keeps us moving swiftly and keeping teams working on the right things. Let's think really quickly here about this organization. It's a very small company, but I think it's good enough for the example. Using the team topologies language here, we have three streams, and one of them is inside of a platform group. Now, in these three streams, it's not inherently clear if they're all working towards the same goal or not. So let me just fix that really quickly by showing you they are indeed, everyone inside of this group is working towards reaching the same target, right? And they're not working towards specific non-targets. And that's, by the way, one of the great ways to know if you have a good strategy or not is explaining what your strategy is not doing in really concrete details that would be plausible for your strategy to do, right? Going to the moon is not a strategy for 99.9% of companies, but I digress. We know everyone in here is working towards the same target. It feels intuitive. Unfortunately, what we often see, and we run into all the time, is a different situation where we have different targets, right? So this is the more typical organizational challenge when we hear people say, we need to get better at prioritization, we need to get better at, picking our targets and picking what we're going to work on. This is what they mean. So in this case here, we have three teams chasing after four different targets, which are actually going in four entirely different directions. Now, if you want these teams to work together, this is going to be a much more challenging team than this one over here, because in this one here, there's a reason to cooperate, right? They're all working together on the same thing. But in this one here, if this stream at the top only cared about those top two targets, and the ones at the bottom, let's say the platform cared about this one, and the second stream here only cared about this target, there's no inherent incentives, goals, purpose to help them reach something greater than the sum of their parts, right? That's the most important thing I think to think about here is the interactions between teams and the environment that they're in. This is the thing that will encourage your teams to work together and set aside individual roadmaps for the sake of a larger goal versus ones that are, split asunder into four different directions. Now, this maneuver here might be interesting if you want to intentionally create different organizations, right? So you'd say these teams here need to move towards these targets, and these teams up at the top need to move towards these targets, and we cancel this one. You would actually end up creating a motivation and incentive to restructure the organization in a much more organic way and a meaningful way that is better than a simple Google document, right? So if you just say, here's a diagram, that's the organization, it's nice that you have this PowerPoint, it's nice that you have this graphic, but the way people work needs to be enabled, right? You have to do this from the base level. So if you are asymmetric with what you think you're doing in a leadership team, drawing, your teams and what organizations they belong to, but then when we come down to it, we say we have different levels of goals and targets that don't keep them together, you should expect that they fracture and don't work together. But if you keep them together on a single shared goal, they should have less friction. In team topologies, we'll often have ways these teams interact, right? So we'd have an interaction mode here, this is a service, this one could be collaboration. They would have a lot less friction switching gears along those lines in order to collaborate at a higher frequency, at a higher change rate of interaction than one over here where, we might have to wait 2 quarters to have enough bandwidth before we can start collaborating with you on that feature because our roadmap is so busy. And this is the real importance of having these shared targets, right? This is the thing that keeps teams working together. In a previous video, I said, maybe, if you remember my what does a leadership team need to do video? I said, there might be reasons that you don't want, certain teams to work together. And I think that is a legitimate reason here, right? So if you don't want to keep those teams together, if you don't want them to have a high rate of collaboration, and there are good reasons to do that, this tactic down below might help you do that. It might help you pull those teams apart, in which means you might need two different leadership groups to do that. But at the same time, don't use this tactic down here simply because you have a hard time being selective with your strategy, right? If you are not selective with your strategy, you are not only chasing four different goals, you're hit a second time on your performance because those teams don't have a reason to cooperate and they end up mutually blocking one another, right? So if you want to keep teams to work together, make sure it looks like this.